get my 6. If you listen closely, you can hear the rustling of leaves. You can hear footsteps, yet see nothing. Perhaps we shouldn't be looking for the big guy. Perhaps we should be looking for the little people, the wee people. Or perhaps that's just on my mind because that's kind of what this story's about. I can't remember exactly how this topic came up, but a few days ago my son asked me about doppelgangers. He asked what a doppelganger was. I guess maybe he heard the word somewhere, maybe at school on the bus, and I explained to him, as most of you watching know, that the whole concept or idea of a doppelganger is that all of us, each and every one of us, has someone somewhere out there in the world who looks exactly like us, like an identical twin. That's the first part of the story, or the theory, or the urban legend, as you will. The second part is that if we are to ever meet our doppelganger face to face, we die. Both us and the doppelganger. I noticed it got very quiet. The footsteps stopped, and then we clearly heard a thunderous tree knock. So perhaps we should be looking for the wee people as well as the big guy. Continue to get my 6. I have a story for you that sheds a different light on the whole concept of a doppelganger and what actually might happen if we see one, if we see our doppelganger. And it's something that happened, 18 years or so ago. It had just completely slipped my mind until my son started talking about doppelgangers. So the story involves this little old Irish man that was living here in the U.S., here in Central Virginia. I used to see him for months, maybe as much as a year before I actually met him. Then when I met him and got his story, it was an amazing story. This bird might be singing out in the morning because I swear I just heard a second tree knock. Continue to get my 6. All right, so as you know, if you follow the channel, I run. I'm an avid runner. Just really got back into it this year, taking it seriously for the first time in 15 years. But 18 years or so ago, I was a financial planner in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I had an office that was in an old brick house. When the house was built, it was residential area, but Charlottesville just continues to grow like crazy. It's going to become a suburb of DC probably in my lifetime. That's how much everything's growing between us and DC, which is only 2 hours north of us. So by the time I came to town to start my financial planning practice, the little brick ranch house had been zoned commercial, and it was an office. The beauty of it was that it had a full bathroom in it with a bathtub and a shower. And as somebody who back then was very actively running, actually training for the Olympic marathon trials, the 2008, never made it, went through divorce, all that crashed. But I would often run on had an hour. I would take an hour from noon to 1 for lunch, and most of that hour I would spend running 6 or 8 miles. I could come back to the office, shower, get my suit back on. I'd shove some food in my mouth and get back to work. Well, I'd be out running often. I had this one loop. It was a 6 mile loop, and I would see this little old man running with a severe limp, an extreme limp. And he'd always say, "Keep at it, young man." And he had an accent, and it was an Irish accent, and I probably just slaughtered it. Apologize. I know we've got folks in Ireland watching, and I'm of Irish descent. Just only found that out this summer when I reconnected with some family members. So I mean no disrespect. I'm just terrible with imitating accents, I guess, or at least the Irish accent. And so when I would prospect, I would actually go through neighborhoods and I would knock on doors, cold call him. Well, as it happened, I actually met this man while out knocking on doors one day. He didn't answer the door. Nobody answered the door. But as I was leaving the house, and it was a small house, it was a nice neighborhood. It was an affluent neighborhood, and there's many of them in Charlottesville. But it was one of the smaller homes in this affluent neighborhood. I was walking down the walk to leave because nobody answered the door, and here he comes hobbling around the corner. Now, when he walked, his limp wasn't as noticeable. It was more like a gimp than a limp. But when he ran, it was more profound. And I introduced myself, and he says, "I see you running every day, kid. I know who you are. I just didn't know what you did," and all this. So we talked. I told him what I did. And he says, "I'm busy now." He says, "Come back and see me some other time. Maybe catch me when I'm not so busy." He loved to do landscaping. And as it turned out, he was a retired landscape artist. When I met him, he was probably early 70s. So I went back a couple weeks later. I happened to be in that neighborhood following up with a conversation I had with somebody else I'd met. And I thought, while I'm here, I'm going to go meet this guy. And his name was Mikey. And he wasn't busy when I stopped by. He invited me into his house. And we sat in his kitchen. That's the thing. If you ever are in business and you deal with people, 90% of business is done in the kitchen, not the living room. So we sat in the kitchen. We were small talking. I was getting to know him a little bit. And his wife, who was an Irish woman, and she was a tiny little thing, she sat in the living room. She wouldn't join us. I introduced myself to her, and she gave me a like a grump. She wasn't interested, and I just figured, well, I'm a sales guy. I get that reaction a lot. Talk to 20 to 30 people a day. You get that 18 to 28 times a day. She's sitting there with her arms crossed, staring at us, glaring at us, and she was glaring a little bit more harshly than I was used to being glared at. So I talked to Mikey a little bit more at length, and I asked him, are you an investor? Do you like to invest? And it turns out that was one of his hobbies. He said he had two lifelong hobbies. Running, and he said he actually used to be good at it. He was a sub 420 miler in his youth, which would have been a long time ago. And to go under 420 when he would have been in his prime would have been world class. And he said his other hobby was investing. And during the time that I met him, he was big into stocks, loved stocks. But he let me know that he started with investing through real estate back in Ireland. His father had done it, and his father had some properties, and his father actually transferred a couple of properties over to him so he could get a start. And the whole time he's telling me this story and he's talking, it's like it sounded almost as if he had just gotten here. He never, like, his accent never left, despite the fact that he had been here about 40 years. And I thought it was a beautiful thing. And my wife dearly has been here for 6 years now from the Philippines. She still has a Filipina accent, and I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. She has accepted our culture, and she has assimilated into our culture. From day one, she's always respected our laws, came here legally. But I like her accent. This is how I view it, as part of who she is. And I hope she never changes that part about herself. So anyway, the entire time Mikey was talking, especially when he started talking about real estate, the glares and the looks from his wife in that other room, they just became deeper and darker, and I didn't feel comfortable. You're gonna find out why. So we'd talk about this stock and we'd talk about that stock. And this was back, It was around the time the dot-com bubble burst. So we were talking about a lot of, the dot-coms. And he said that he would play those stocks as if he were gambling, which is really what anybody at that time was doing. But he was smart enough to know that you have to have earnings. And what was it he told me? He said, Kevin, he says, you can fake earnings, but you can't fake a dividend. So my serious money is in the dividend-paying blue-chip stocks. You can fake earnings, young man, but you cannot fake a dividend. Remember that, boy. Good advice. Hey, any company can say, oh, we made $10 billion last year. But you can't claim to be paying a certain amount of dividends unless you're actually paying them out. So he liked the big blue-chip stocks, banks, utilities, real estate investment trusts that were solid at the time. And I asked him, after I'd been there, I'd go back a few times, and there was this thing in sales called the fourth call bridge. By the time you make your fourth contact with somebody and they've not done any business with you, you kind of got to figure out whether or not you're wasting your time with them or not. And I was a young man. I was in my 20s, and I was new to sales. And basically, if somebody wasn't mean to me, I'd go back and see them again, because it was nice having people that would just talk to you and not be mean to you. That's one of the reasons I kept going back to see Mikey. But on the fourth time I was there, I called him to the mat, is how we would refer to it also. I made that fourth call bridge. I said, look, do you ever have intentions of investing in any of your money, with me, through me? Because he made it clear he liked to do his own thing because it was a hobby. He liked to follow it. He was retired. He had the time. And he said, he said, I wouldn't mind investing some of me money, but he'd have to be a right good young man. I'm telling you, it'd have to be a right good young man, Kevin. And I'm like, well, am I that right good young man? He goes, And he looks nervously into the living room, right? And his wife's sitting there just glaring at him. Listen, if you don't know this, the man might make the money, but the woman controls how it is spent and distributed. She controls in a successful marriage. That's what I found as an investment counselor, and I guess that's kind of what I find in my own marriage. Fortunately, my wife's thrifty. She's non-materialistic. She's non-consumeristic, so it's great. But he said, I'll tell you what, young man. He says, I'll come to your office one day next week, and we'll discuss the issue further. He says, I might give you a little bit of my money just because I like you. But he says, it's going to be a tough decision because this is my interest. This is my hobby. I'm like, okay. So we set an appointment for the following week. He came to my office, and he came to my office alone. And he came in, and we didn't start talking about business right off the bat. And you never do. That's bad business to go right into business. We're talking about running. And and he's asking me about my past performances as a runner. And I was good. I mean, I ran a 4:33 mile, but I wasn't under 4:20 back in my prime. Yep, keep your eye on it. So anyway, he says, Kevin, you've been seeing me out there for more than a year running with my limp. You ever wonder how I got it? I said, no. Well, actually, I said, I have wondered, but I would never ask because that's just not, prudent. He goes, I tell you, me boy. He says, I mentioned to you, I used to be a real estate investor back in Ireland before I came to the States. And I was like, yeah. He goes, I'll tell you, I might be a nice, right, good old man right now, but back in the day, I was a mean old son of a bitch. That's how he said it, and I don't like to cuss on this channel. And I was like, oh, you never. You're like the nicest little old guy ever. He goes, I tell you, it was all about the money, and I was a mean old B-word. And he said he was pretty much a slumlord. His father had been a slumlord, and he said he had one tenant who was beautiful. She was gorgeous, and she was so hot that when she walked into a room, the paint would melt off the walls. So, but she was always late on her rent. And he would just go after her. He would be mean. He would be relentless. And she got behind once, and he told her he was going to throw her out. And she said, "You wouldn't dare." And she threatened him, claimed to be a witch and all these things. And, that's been a topic here on the channel a little bit. Wow, look at that. It's gone. You see that? Wow. Oh, there it is again. Okay, keep your eyes on it. So anyway, he threatened to throw her out. She said, "You'll be damned if you do." And he says, "Yeah, then you're out tomorrow morning." And she told him, she said, "You be on the lookout for the man that looks just like you, and don't you dare meet him in the face and look him in the eye when you see him." And he was like, "What's that even mean? What's that even mean?" And so, anyway, the next morning, him and his father, they had an actual office, a real estate office. And they would walk there because it was like a country that's not America. So if somebody worked a quarter of a mile away from their house, they actually walked instead of driving their $70,000 SUV, paying over $3 a gallon in gas to drive there. So, but on his way there, he noticed there was a man up ahead of him walking with a limp, a profound limp. And at the time, Mikey didn't have a limp. And he noticed the man looked familiar. So he's walking, he's catching up to him, and the man was using a cane. He was laying heavily on this cane to help him walk. And as he got close to him, he thought, "My goodness, I know when a man looks familiar, he looks just like me." He was a small, slightly built man. And he said, "Sir, excuse me, sir." When he got right up on him, the man turned around, looked him in the eye. Mikey said he swears it was him. It was like his twin. And instantly he fell to the ground. He felt a sharp pain in one of his knees. And he grabbed his knee and he's like, "Ah, criminy!" Screaming out in pain. But he doesn't remember having twisted his knee. None of that stuff. But he looked up by the time he got over his agonizing pain, and this man was gone. This man that looked just like him. And Mikey could barely stand. He could barely come to his feet. But he did. He limped the rest of the way to the office. He got to the office. He called the doctor. The doctor, back in those days, they'd come to you. And the doctor says, "It's the strangest thing. I can't feel anything wrong with your knee, my boy." So the doctor wrote it off as being psychosomatic. No injury. He would go on to get x-rays. There was never any swelling, no indication by way of x-ray that anything was broken or anything was torn, but he never walked without a limp again. I'm getting chills thinking about it. So anyway, that happened to be the day that he was going to take papers to this beautiful, sexy, mean woman that was behind on her rent. He was ready to go throw her out, taking the papers. And that's when he started remembering what it was she had told him. And so he got to her house, and he was reluctant to serve her with these papers to tell her to get out. And so I said to him, "What did you do?" He says, I'll tell you, me boy, before I could throw her out and before I couldn't, she put a hex upon me and she made me fall in love with her." I was like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah." He says, "I tried everything to get away from her, but she was all I could think about. And everywhere I went, I just saw her face in my mind. She never paid her rent again. I left my homeland. I came to the States to get away from the wench. But she followed me. She came." I'm like, "So how did you finally get away from her?" He goes, "I didn't, me boy. I married her." And I laughed. I just busted a gut laughing at this guy. I'm like, okay, so you expect me to think your wife's a witch. You expect me to think you saw your doppelganger who was conjured up by this witch. And when you saw your doppelganger, instead of dying, you fell down in pain and you've walked with this miserable limp ever since. You've run with this limp. "It ruined me running career. I'm telling you, me boy," he told me. "All right, Mikey. So, are you gonna invest any money with me or not?" He's like, "I tell you, me lad, I wouldn't mind investing me money with someone else, but he'd have to be a right good young man. I'm telling you that, me boy." He didn't invest any money with me that day, and he left. Well, I might have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. And I kind of figured out the old guy, he liked me. Okay, he was retired, maybe he was a little bit bored, maybe he was a little bit lonely. His wife seemed kind of cold like a fish. I just kind of figured out, though, he wasn't never going to invest any money with me. So I figured, well, I'm not going to go back to see him, even though I liked him very much. But I was struggling. That was during my first couple of years as a broker. I almost didn't make it. I was almost going to be fired on a regular basis because I wasn't pulling in the commissions the firm wanted me to pull in. But I said, if he ever comes to me, even with just, 10 grand, I will feel honored to invest that for. And I didn't know how much he had. I assumed it wasn't a whole lot, but he did live in a nice neighborhood. But I figured, I will help him because I like him, and I'd be honored to have his business just as much as I'd be honored to have anybody else's business. About a month went by. He never came back, and like I said, I didn't go back to his place. But after about a month, his wife comes walking through the door. She comes in and she sits down and she says, "Me husband's dead. Mikey's died. I thought you should know." I was like, "Well, thanks, Mrs. Mikey." I can't even remember her name. And I just felt creeped out with her in my presence. And she goes, "Here, I guess I should give you this. This was his hobby, not mine. I have no interest. Transfer this to yourself and just manage me money for me now that it's all mine." And it was an account that Mikey had managed. It was his own money, and it was worth $1.7 million. I was like, OMG. And that was back when OMG didn't exist. Social media wasn't around, so OMG had not been invented yet, brah. Hey, I got 3% commission. So $51,000 gross commission. Then I got 40% of that. So you're looking at roughly $20,000 to transfer that account. So I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, wow. And she goes, "What questions do you have of me, Kevin?" And I said, "Just one, and it has nothing to do with this money." She goes, "Then what is it? Out with it." And I said, "That time Mikey came by here, he told me the craziest story, and I just want to know if it's true." She goes, "Let me guess, about the witch and a doppelganger and running away from Ireland and coming to the States." I'm like, "Yeah, how'd you know? Is that story true?" She goes, "I had reason to believe that's why he wanted to meet with you outside of my presence." I'm like, "Is that story true?" She goes, "What do you think?" And she's glaring at me with that mean old look on her face. I said, "Honestly?" She goes, "I want the truth." I said, "Honestly, I do believe it, and I think you're the witch." She reached down and grabbed that statement and crumbled it up in her hands, and she got up and she walked out, and just as she was about to leave, she said, "I'll not be bringing my business here." She goes, "And I tell you another thing, you better be on the lookout for a man that looks just the same as you." And she left. And I didn't go running in that neighborhood for the rest of the time. Another 4 years I worked out of that office before I went into private practice and worked for myself from home for a couple of years before leaving the business and going into the military and all that stuff I did after that. I never stepped foot in that woman's neighborhood again. And for the longest time, I was looking over my shoulder for a man who looked just like me but walked with a limp. Thank God I never saw him. I hope I never do. We'll be seeing you for more next time.